So with a project of that scale, you can imagine with 25 million hectares, we had to start to look at the trade-offs between dealing with high precision data versus the time and computational effort required to actually process these data sets. So this is just a bit of a conceptual example of the differences when we start to deal with raster data sets at, just a 10 by 10 meter versus a 5 by 5 meter versus a 1 by 1 meter resolution, right? So there's obviously going to be great computational effort required to increase and maintain that 1 meter cell size and processing effort. So for 1,000 hectares, we can see that we're going from the 100,000 cells to 10 million cells, right? So from a storage requirement, we're going from about 0.34 of a megabyte up to 34 megabytes per 1,000 hectares, right? So this is just for one raster data set, for example, the bare earth LiDAR, right? When we imagine that we have to start to consider the full feature LiDAR, the bare earth, the wood areas raster, and all these other ancillary data sets, the storage capacity and the process timing required, it goes up exponentially through orders of magnitude as we decide to maintain this 1 meter resolution. But that was something that we were prepared to do, was to take the extra time to keep these data sets at their highest possible fidelity. So now a bit of a conceptual example here again. This is at the bridge in Emend. So when we're looking at 1 meter resolution for a 25 million hectare project, we're dealing with 250 billion cells just on the bare earth LiDAR. Right, so that's 830 gigabytes, again, just for that DEM data. We can see if we were to lower the resolution down to 2 meters, we're going to subset that into about a quarter. So about 200 gigabytes of storage. But I don't know if you noticed or not, but the stream channels actually change because we're starting to lose the topographic integrity of that data set. And especially in areas of low relief, that can be crucially important to get proper flow locations. So again, if we go to 4 hectares, or 4 meter resolution, we're lowering the fidelity and the resolution and the accuracy of our channel networks, which subsequently inform the wet areas maps. And again, if we go to 8 hectares, or 8 meter resolution, we're really just starting to lose all the detail and the value of these LiDAR data sets. So we can see that there's a great impact of keeping the data at 1 meter resolution, but there's also a great value to keeping it at 1 meter resolution. So the way that we tend to process this is we have a large data set server that houses all the LiDAR data. And we send out a request that will distribute whatever project area we're dealing with to one of our machines. And it will process that area and send it back to the server. Right? We have multiple cores on each of these machines. We have multiple machines to handle this process. So there's essentially a data management system that I've designed that knows the project scope that we're dealing with and can subset the data and divide it amongst the different machines to basically parallelize the processing to get these areas run through in a fairly time-efficient manner. So that's how we're able to try to come up with a fairly reasonable turnaround for some of these data sets. But still, in terms of that CAN4 rerun, if you remember seeing that area in yellow that we reprocessed based off of the current methods, that area is still processed on, I believe, 24 cores, and it took the better part of 3 weeks just to run that area through. So it's still very, very computationally taxing to make these data sets a reality.
How long does it take for a hectare to be run?
I haven't really done any analysis on that based on the current methods, and a lot of it kind of depends on the topography of the area, because there are certain things that have to be done in terms of hydrological conditioning of the data sets. And I'll be showing a bit of that as we proceed through. But it's hard to come up with the time per hectare, and it would depend entirely on the cores that you're using, how many cores, how far you're distributing it, the speed of the computers and all that sort of stuff, right? So.
What was the point density, or the average point density you received?
The average point density, well, we received the raw LAST data, and we also received the official bare earth rasters. But the requirement, I believe, was 1 point per square meter on the bare earth, and Barry White could probably confirm that. But that's what it tends to be. Obviously, it's going to be less underneath forest canopy, but that was, as far as I know, the spec that was required. So another bit of an overview. So we just have an ortho photo. We can see a lot of cuts in this area. Now when we received the LiDAR data, it's subset into 48 subtiles of each of 1 to 50,000 quadrant of a tile, NTS tile sheet. So we'll try to walk through this and just kind of show you what we mean. So in green, this is the extent of each of the small LiDAR tiles that we received from the GOA. we amalgamate those into these areas in red, which again, so we amalgamate 48 of these subtiles into quadrants of a 1 to 50,000 NTS tile sheet. And these are the processing units with which we process and deliver the wood areas mapping rasters. So we'll have a DEM data set for a particular tile. This tile index exists entirely across the province. When we process, a queue is created, and the wood areas mapping data set now knows this is the extent or the area with which we're going to start processing. So the proper tiles and data sets are copied from the server back to each of the individual machines. They're assigned a core, and analysis can begin. Now, we know from an overland flow perspective that a LiDAR tile is not an island unto itself. So in order to maintain the inflows and outflows relative to any LiDAR tile, we have to expand the edges to incorporate the elevation of its neighbors. So there's some spatial indexing and things like that go on in order to know the elevation of its neighbors. So at processing, we expand those edges to incorporate some of that elevation information surrounding each of these LiDAR tiles. After all the processing is done, we clip everything back to the original extent, and then the final, once we're all done, the core is released. We can start on the next tile, which might be to the north or the south or whatever it may be. And processing will continue and iterate through until the entire landscape is done. This is done in a seamless fashion, so it might be kind of difficult to see, but these flow connections and wood areas, flows do continue across tile boundaries, but they are delivered on the individual tile basis.